The moment I realized my own family had literally forgotten I existed was when the hotel shuttle pulled away from the curb without me, leaving me standing in the rain outside Seattle's Grand Metropolitan Hotel with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. Through the shuttle's rear window, I could see my mother Sarah chatting animatedly with my sister Jessica, my brother Michael scrolling through his phone, and my stepfather David pointing at something in the distance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. Mon, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. None of them had even noticed the empty seat where I should have been sitting. I stood there for a full minute, rain soaking through my cardigan, watching the shuttle disappear into Seattle traffic. We had just finished our family reunion weekend, 3 days of carefully orchestrated activities designed to showcase the Peterson family's success and unity. 3 days where I had been relegated to taking photos, organizing schedules, and ensuring everyone else had what they needed while being systematically excluded from every meaningful conversation and decision. The irony wasn't lost on me that they had forgotten me at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. If they had bothered to listen during any of our conversations over the years, they might have known that this particular hotel chain had recently become very familiar to me. But the Peterson family had perfected the art of not really seeing me, not really hearing me, treating me like background scenery in their carefully curated lives. My name is Emma Chen, and at 32, I had spent most of my adult life trying to earn a place at my own family's table. When my mother married David Peterson 12 years ago, I thought I was gaining not just a stepfather but entry into a world of stability and belonging I had never known. My biological father had left when I was 8, and my mother had struggled as a single parent working double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat. David Peterson seemed like salvation, successful, established with 2 children from his previous marriage, who would become my instant sibling. What I had anticipated was that joining the Peterson family would feel less like gaining a family and more like becoming an unpaid assistant to their lifestyle. From the beginning, there was an invisible hierarchy that placed me firmly at the bottom. Jessica, David's daughter, was the golden child, beautiful, charming, with a marketing degree she had never really used, but which everyone treated as if it qualified her for CEO position. Michael, 2 years younger than Jessica, was the future heir to David's commercial real estate empire, groomed from childhood to take over the family business. And then there was me, the stepdaughter, the one who didn't quite belong but was expected to be grateful for the privilege of proximity to their success. I had learned early to make myself useful. I organized their family vacations, remembered everyone's birthdays, sent thank you notes on behalf of the family, and somehow became the default coordinator for every Peterson family gathering. I arranged restaurant reservations, booked flights, researched activities, and managed logistics while everyone else simply showed up and enjoyed themselves. My mother, so grateful to have found stability with David, never seemed to notice how I was treated differently. Or if she did notice, she chose not to see it, perhaps afraid that advocating for me might jeopardize her own security. I understood her perspective, even if it hurt. She had struggled so hard for so many years that David's comfortable suburban lifestyle must have felt like a miracle she couldn't risk losing. The Peterson family lived in an elegant colonial home in Bellevue, all hardwood floors and granite countertops, with a 3-car garage and a meticulously landscaped yard. David's commercial real estate firm specialized in office buildings and retail spaces throughout the Pacific Northwest, and the family enjoyed the fruits of that success. European vacations, luxury cars, private school tuitions, country club memberships, all the markers of upper-middle-class achievement. I meanwhile lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, worked as a project manager for a small consulting firm, and had somehow become the family's unpaid event coordinator. Every Peterson gathering required my organizational skills, my attention to detail, my ability to anticipate problems, and solve them before anyone else even noticed they existed. Yet when it came time for family photos, I was often the one behind the camera. When conversations turned to family business or future plans, my input was neither sought nor particularly welcomed. The pattern had been established so gradually that I hadn't even realized how deeply entrenched it had become until recently. It started with small things, Jessica mentioning a work frustration and everyone immediately rallying to offer advice and support, while my professional challenges were met with polite nods and subject changes. Michael's latest business idea would generate hours of enthusiastic discussion, while my thoughts on market trends or investment strategies were largely ignored. When Jessica had decided to launch her lifestyle blog 3 years ago, the entire family had mobilized to support her. David contributed startup capital, my mother helped with content creation, Michael handled the technical setup, and I found myself managing her social media calendar and scheduling posts. The blog never gained significant traction, but the family continued to treat it as a serious business venture worthy of their time and financial support. When Michael had wanted to expand his role in David's company by developing a new division focused on sustainable commercial properties, the family had spent months discussing strategy, attending industry conferences together, and celebrating every small milestone. I had actually contributed substantial research to that project, spending weekends analyzing market data and preparing reports, but my contributions were acknowledged with brief thank yous before the conversation moved on to more important family members' perspective. My own professional achievements seemed to exist in a parallel universe that rarely intersected with Peterson family awareness. 5 years ago, I had left my corporate job to start my own consulting practice, specializing in hospitality industry analysis. It had been a risky move, leaving behind a steady salary and benefits to chase something that felt more meaningful and challenging. The transition hadn't been easy. Those first 2 years I had lived on savings and determination, taking on small projects and gradually building a reputation for thorough analysis and strategic insight. I specialized in helping hotel chains optimize their operations, analyzing everything from guest satisfaction metrics to revenue management systems to market positioning strategy. What the Peterson family didn't know, because they had never really asked about the specifics of my work, was that my little consulting practice had evolved into something much more significant. My client base had grown to include some of the most prestigious hotel brands in the country. I had developed proprietary analytical tools that were becoming industry standards. My insights had helped clients increase their revenue by millions of dollars. More importantly, about 18 months ago, I had made a decision that would have shocked the Peterson family if they had been paying attention. Using the substantial savings I had accumulated from my consulting success, combined with a group of private investors I had cultivated through my work, I had begun quietly acquiring underperforming hotels in major metropolitan markets. It started with a small boutique property in Portland that was struggling with management issues and declining occupancy rates. My analysis had shown that the problems were entirely operational rather than structural. Poor marketing, inefficient staffing, outdated revenue management system. I bought the property for significantly less than its potential value, implemented the same strategies I had been recommending to clients for years, and within 8 months had transformed it into a profitable operation. The success of that first acquisition had attracted attention from other investors and provided the capital for larger deals. Over the past year, I had quietly assembled a small but growing portfolio of hotels in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Denver. Each property was carefully selected based on my analysis of market conditions, growth potential, and operational improvement opportunities. 6 months ago, I had achieved something that would have been unimaginable when I first started my consulting practice. Through a complex deal involving multiple investor partners, I had acquired a controlling interest in Pacific Crown Hotels, a mid-tier chain with 23 properties across the western United States. The deal had required every bit of financial and strategic expertise I had developed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Months of negotiation and a level of risk that had kept me awake many nights, but it had worked. At 32 years old, I was now the majority owner of a hotel chain worth approximately $47 million. The properties needed work, that was why I had been able to acquire them at a reasonable price, but my analysis indicated that with proper management and strategic improvements, the chain could be worth double that within 3 years. The irony was that the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, where my family had just forgotten me, was one of the properties I now owned, I had acquired it just 2 months ago as part of the Pacific Crown deal, though none of the Peterson family knew that. They had chosen this location for our family reunion weekend because David's assistant had found a good rate online, not realizing that the woman they routinely dismissed and overlooked was actually their host. Standing in the rain outside what was technically my own hotel, I felt a mixture of hurt and dark amusement. The Peterson family had spent the weekend treating me like their personal assistant, expecting me to coordinate activities, make reservations, and handle logistics while they enjoyed themselves. They had complained about the hotel's service, criticized the restaurant's menu, and suggested improvements to the facilities without once considering that their feedback was being delivered to the owner. I pulled out my phone and called an Uber, then walked back into the hotel lobby. The desk clerk, a young man named Marcus, who had been working here for 3 years, recognized me immediately. "Miss Chen," he said with a concerned expression, "I thought you had checked out with your family. Is everything all right?" "They left without me," I said simply, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I'll need to book another night." Marcus looked confused. "Left without you? But surely they'll realize and come back." I considered this possibility and realized I wasn't entirely sure they would notice anytime soon. They were heading to the airport for flights departing at different times to different destinations. Jessica was flying back to Los Angeles, where she lived in a West Hollywood apartment that David helped subsidize. Michael was returning to Seattle, where he worked at David's company and lived in a downtown condo that David had helped him purchase. My mother and David were flying to Vancouver for a few days of vacation before returning to Bellevue. It was possible they wouldn't realize I was missing until they were already at their respective destinations. The thought was more depressing than I wanted to acknowledge. "Let me get you set up in one of our executive suites," Marcus offered. "On the house, of course." I almost accepted automatically, then remembered that I was no longer just a guest who had been forgotten by her family. I owned this hotel. This was my property, my business, my responsibility. "Actually, Marcus, I think it's time I told you something. Can you call Jennifer Morrison down to the lobby? I need to speak with both of you." Jennifer was the hotel's general manager, a competent woman in her 50s, who had been struggling to improve the property's performance with limited resources and outdated systems. She appeared in the lobby within minutes, looking slightly puzzled by the unusual request. "Jennifer, Marcus," I began, feeling strange about what I was about to reveal. "I think it's time you knew that I'm not just a guest here. I'm actually the new owner of this hotel, and the entire Pacific Crown chain." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus's mouth actually fell open slightly, while Jennifer's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to understanding to something that might have been relief. "You're Emma Chen of Chen Hospitality Consulting," Jennifer said slowly. "The one who's been sending us the operational improvement recommendations." "The same," I confirmed. "I've been trying to keep a low profile while I assessed the properties in person, but given the circumstances, I think it's time to be more direct about our relationship." Jennifer looked around the lobby with new eyes, as if seeing it from a different perspective. "So when your family was complaining about the breakfast service yesterday, they were unknowingly giving feedback to the owner." "Yes," I finished. "And actually some of their observations were quite useful, even if the delivery was less than diplomatic." Marcus was still processing this information. "So you've been staying here as a guest to evaluate our performance?" "Among other things," I said. "I wanted to experience the property from a customer's perspective before implementing major changes. Unfortunately, my family's decision to abandon me here has accelerated my timeline somewhat." The three of us moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, and I spent the next hour explaining my vision for the Pacific Crown Hotel's transformation. Jennifer had been managing this property for 2 years, watching occupancy rates slowly decline while corporate headquarters, the previous owners, had refused to invest in necessary improvement. She had submitted proposal after proposal for renovations, staff training, and marketing initiatives, only to be told that budgets were too tight and profits too slim. "I've been wanting to upgrade our guest services system for months," she explained. "The current software is from 2015, and it's causing constant problems with reservations and billing, but corporate kept saying it wasn't a priority." "Well, now I'm corporate," I said with a slight smile, and I agree that it's a priority. In fact, I think you'll find that a lot of the improvements you've been requesting are about to become reality. I outlined my plans for the chain: significant technology upgrades, staff training programs, facility improvements, and a complete rebranding focused on providing exceptional value and service in the mid-tier market segment. The goal wasn't to compete with luxury hotels, but to become the clear choice for business travelers and tourists who wanted quality accommodations without premium prices. The numbers show that there's a significant gap in the market, I explained, pulling up financial projections on my phone. Luxury hotels are increasingly expensive and often over-engineered for most travelers' needs. Budget hotels have cut so many services that the guest experience suffers. We can position ourselves right in the middle: excellent service, modern amenities, fair prices. Jennifer's excitement was visible as I described the planned improvements: new bedding and furniture, upgraded bathrooms, improved lighting, better soundproofing, enhanced Wi-Fi systems, modernized fitness centers, and completely reimagined breakfast service. We're also going to implement a comprehensive staff training program, I continued. Everyone from housekeeping to front desk to management will receive ongoing education in customer service, problem solving, and hospitality excellence. I want every guest to feel like their experience here exceeds their expectations. Marcus, who had been listening intently, raised his hand hesitantly. Does this mean we might be getting more staff? We've been running pretty lean, and sometimes it's hard to provide the level of service we want to offer. Absolutely, I confirmed. Proper staffing is essential to guest satisfaction. I'd rather have higher labor costs and excellent reviews than save money and watch our reputation suffer. As we talked, I found myself energized by their enthusiasm and the possibilities ahead. This was what I loved about the hospitality industry: the opportunity to create experiences that made people feel welcome, comfortable, and valued. It was ironic that I had never felt those things in my own family, but perhaps that lack had motivated me to create environments where others could find them. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Jessica's name, and I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jessica," I answered. "Emma, where are you?" Jessica's voice was sharp with irritation rather than concern. "We're at the airport and just realized you're not here. Mom is freaking out." The phrasing was telling. Not "we're worried about you," or "are you okay," but "Mom is freaking out," as if my absence was primarily an inconvenience that was upsetting other people. "I'm still at the hotel," I said calmly. "You left without me." "We left without you? That's impossible. You must have..." There was a pause as she apparently realized what had happened. "Well, where were you when we were loading the shuttle?" "I was in the lobby, exactly where you told me to wait while you went to get your jacket from the room." Another pause. "Well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you run after us?" The question illustrated so perfectly how Jessica viewed the world that I almost laughed. In her mind, it was my responsibility to chase after them, to make sure I wasn't forgotten, to manage their oversight of my existence. "I was carrying your bags and Michael's laptop bag," I reminded her. "By the time I could have run outside, you were already gone." "Okay, well, this is a disaster," Jessica said, with the tone of someone confronting a major crisis. "Michael's flight leaves in 2 hours, and mine leaves in 3. Mom and David's doesn't leave until this evening, but they're already through security." I waited for her to suggest a solution, curious to see how she would handle this logistical challenge that didn't directly affect her. "Can you just take a taxi to the airport and catch a later flight?" she asked finally. "My flight isn't until tomorrow afternoon," I reminded her. It was a detail I had mentioned several times during the weekend, but apparently no one had been listening. "Tomorrow? Why tomorrow?" "Because I have a business meeting here in Seattle tomorrow morning," I explained, the same explanation I had given when we were planning the trip. "What kind of business meeting?" Jessica asked, and I could hear the dismissive undertone. In the Peterson family worldview, my work was never quite as important or legitimate as theirs. I looked at Jennifer and Marcus, who were pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Here was my opportunity to reveal the truth. to explain exactly what kind of business meeting required my presence in Seattle. Instead, I found myself falling back into old patterns. Just client work, I said vaguely. Nothing that concerns you. Well, this is incredibly inconvenient, Jessica continued. Mom is crying at the gate because she thinks something terrible happened to you. David is trying to calm her down. Michael missed his first flight because we were trying to figure out where you were. This whole thing is a mess. The fact that my absence had caused genuine distress for my mother did make me feel guilty, even though the situation wasn't my fault. I could picture her worrying, imagining worst-case scenarios, probably blaming herself for not keeping better track of me. Tell Mom I'm fine, I said. I'm safe at the hotel, and I'll talk to her when she gets home. She wants to talk to you now, Jessica said, but she can't call because they're about to board. Can you call her later today? Of course. And Jessica's voice carried a note of irritation that suggested she was about to make this situation somehow my fault. Next time, maybe speak up sooner. We can't read your mind. The injustice of that statement took my breath away. I had been exactly where they told me to be, doing exactly what they had asked me to do. The fact that they had forgotten me wasn't a failure of communication on my part. It was a reflection of how little space I occupied in their awareness. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice carefully neutral. After ending the call, I sat in the lobby for a few minutes, processing the conversation. Jennifer and Marcus had tactfully moved away to give me privacy, but I could see them watching with concerned expression. The thing that struck me most wasn't Jessica's lack of concern for my well-being. I had long since accepted that empathy wasn't her strongest trait. It was the complete absence of curiosity about what I was doing in Seattle. What kind of business meeting was important enough to extend my trip? In a functional family, someone would have asked follow-up questions, shown interest in my professional life, perhaps even offered support, but the Peterson family had never been particularly curious about my work. They knew I had some kind of consulting business, that I traveled occasionally for clients, and that I seemed to be doing well enough to maintain my independence. Beyond that, the details of my professional life remained largely invisible to them. This invisibility had actually been an advantage over the past year, as I had quietly built my hotel empire. There had been no need to explain late-night phone calls with investors, weekend trips to potential properties, or the increasing complexity of my financial portfolio. The Peterson family's lack of interest in my career had provided perfect cover for activities they couldn't have imagined me capable of. I rejoined Jennifer and Marcus, who were discussing some of the operational challenges the hotel faced. The breakfast service that my family had criticized was indeed problematic, but not for the reasons they had identified. The issue wasn't the quality of the food, which was actually quite good, but the efficiency of the service and the layout of the dining area, which created bottlenecks during peak hours. We could redesign the breakfast area to improve flow, I suggested, sketching a rough layout on a napkin. Move the coffee station here, create a separate area for hot items, and add another beverage station on the opposite wall. It would reduce congestion and improve the guest experience significantly. Jennifer studied the sketch with interest. That could work. We'd need to coordinate with the restaurant manager, and possibly do some minor renovation, but the concept makes sense. Let's schedule a meeting with the entire management team for tomorrow morning, I decided. I want to hear everyone's ideas for improvements, not just implement my own vision. The people who work here every day understand the challenges better than I do. Marcus looked pleased by this approach. There are definitely things we've wanted to suggest but weren't sure if anyone was listening. Well, now, someone is listening, I assured him. And more importantly, someone is empowered to actually make changes. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself energized by the possibilities ahead. The hotel had good bones, excellent location, solid infrastructure, and a staff that clearly cared about providing quality service despite limited resources. With proper investment and support, it could become a showcase property for the Pacific Crown brand. I spent the rest of the day touring the hotel with Jennifer, taking notes on everything from carpet wear patterns, to elevator efficiency, to the functionality of the guest room layouts. Every detail mattered in the hospitality industry, and I wanted to understand exactly what needed attention. The guest rooms were clean and adequately furnished,
but everything felt slightly dated and generic. The bedspreads were serviceable but uninspiring. The artwork was the kind of mass-produced hotel art that could be found in any chain property, and the lighting was functional but not particularly welcoming.
We could create a much more distinctive atmosphere, I mused, standing in one of the standard king rooms. Better lighting, upgraded bedding, some local artwork, maybe add reading chairs by the windows. Nothing drastically expensive, but changes that would make guests feel like they're staying somewhere special rather than just anywhere. Jennifer was taking note on her tablet, clearly excited by the prospect of finally being able to implement improvements she had been envisioning for years. What about the bathroom renovations? Some of the fixtures are starting to show their age. Definitely a priority, I agreed. Good bathrooms are essential to guest satisfaction. We'll need to do them in phases to minimize disruption, but I want every bathroom in this hotel to feel modern and luxurious. By evening, I had filled a notebook with observations and ideas. The forgotten family member was transforming into a focused business owner, channeling the hurt of the morning into productive energy for improving my property. I had dinner alone in the hotel restaurant, using the opportunity to evaluate the service and menu from a customer perspective. The food was better than my family had given it credit for, though the presentation could be improved, and the wine list needed updating. The server, a college student named Amy, was attentive and professional despite clearly being overworked. "How long have you been working here?" I asked as she refilled my water glass. "About 6 months," she replied. "I'm studying hospitality management at Seattle University, so this job gives me practical experience. What do you think could be improved about the restaurant operation?" Amy looked surprised by the question but considered it seriously. "Well, we could use more staff during dinner service, and sometimes the kitchen gets backed up because we don't have enough prep space. The POS system is also pretty slow, which makes everything take longer than it should." Her observations aligned with my own analysis. The restaurant had potential but was being held back by operational constraints that could be addressed with modest investment. "If you could change one thing to improve the guest experience, what would it be?" I asked. "More training," she said without hesitation. "I want to provide excellent service, but sometimes I don't know the best way to handle unusual requests or difficult situations. More experienced staff members are helpful, but they're usually too busy to provide much guidance." I made another note. Staff training and development clearly needed to be a major focus of the improvement plan. After dinner, I returned to my room, a suite that Jennifer had insisted on providing, and spent the evening reviewing financial projections and strategic plans for the Pacific Crown chain. Tomorrow's meeting would be my first formal introduction to the Seattle management team as their new owner, and I wanted to be prepared with concrete proposals and realistic timelines. The contrast between my evening and what my family was probably doing was striking. Jessica was likely posting Instagram stories about her flight experience and complaining about airport delays. Michael was probably at home playing video games and not thinking about the day's events at all. My mother and David were presumably enjoying their Vancouver vacation, my absence already fading into background concern now that they knew I was safe. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my own hotel planning improvements that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of future guests. The disparity between how my family saw me and what I was actually capable of accomplishing felt more pronounced than ever. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry we left you behind. Are you sure you're okay?" "David feels terrible." I appreciated that she was concerned, even if the concern came hours late. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry about it. Enjoy Vancouver." "We'll make it up to you," she responded. "Maybe a nice dinner when we get back." The offer was well-intentioned but missed the point entirely. This wasn't about making up for a simple mistake with a compensatory dinner. It was about a pattern of oversight and dismissal that had been building for years. One forgotten ride to the airport was just the most literal manifestation of a much deeper problem. But I didn't try to explain this over text. Instead, I simply replied, "That sounds nice. We'll talk when you're home." As I prepared for bed in what was technically my own hotel, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. 6 months ago, If someone had told me I would be forgotten at a hotel I secretly owned by a family who had no idea I was successful enough to buy hotel chains, I would have thought they were describing a particularly bizarre dream. Yet here I was, and tomorrow I would begin the process of transforming, not just this property, but potentially my entire relationship with the Peterson family. They didn't know it yet, but their casual dismissal of me was about to become much more complicated. I fell asleep in Egyptian cotton sheets that I had unknowingly provided for myself, in a room whose decor I was already planning to improve, dreaming of marble lobbies and guest satisfaction scores, and the look on Jessica's face when she eventually learned the truth about my little consulting business. The woman they had forgotten at the hotel was about to remind them exactly who she was, and the revelation would change everything. The morning arrived crisp and clear, Seattle's skyline gleaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my executive suite. I had slept better than I had in months, despite the strange circumstances that had led me here. There was something liberating about being in a space that was entirely mine, making decisions that would affect my own future rather than coordinating everyone else's needs and preferences. I dressed carefully for the management meeting, choosing a navy blazer and tailored pants that struck the right balance between professional authority and approachable leadership. Today would be my formal introduction to the team as their new owner, and first impressions would set the tone for everything that followed. Jennifer had arranged for the meeting to take place in the hotel's small conference room, and by 8:30 the key department heads had assembled. I recognized some faces from my observations over the weekend, but others were new. The housekeeping supervisor, maintenance manager, restaurant manager, front desk supervisor, and sales coordinator all sat around the oval table with expressions ranging from curious to cautious. Jennifer made the introductions, and I could see the surprise on several faces as they processed that the woman they had seen as just another guest was actually their new boss. The restaurant manager, Roberto, looked particularly startled as he clearly remembered my family's pointed criticism of the breakfast service. "I know this is unexpected," I began, settling into the chair at the head of the table. "I prefer to evaluate properties personally before making major decisions, which is why I spent the weekend here as a regular guest. What I observed confirmed what the financial analysis already told me. This hotel has tremendous potential that hasn't been fully realized." Maria, the housekeeping supervisor, raised her hand tentatively. "Are you planning to make changes to staffing?" The concern in her voice was unmistakable, and I realized these employees had probably experienced previous ownership transitions that resulted in layoffs and uncertainty. "I'm planning to increase staffing," I said, watching relief wash over several faces. "You can't provide excellent guest service when you're understaffed and overworked. My goal is to make this the kind of hotel where employees are proud to work and guests are eager to return." The maintenance manager, Tom, leaned forward with interest. "What about the capital improvements? We've been submitting requests for equipment repairs and facility upgrades for over a year." "Show me your list," I said. "Everything. I want to understand what's needed to bring this property up to the standards our guests deserve." For the next hour, I listened as each department head outlined their challenges, suggestions, and wish lists. The consistency of their concerns painted a clear picture of a property that had been managed for short-term profit extraction rather than long-term success. Deferred maintenance, inadequate staffing, outdated systems, and minimal investment in guest experience improvements had created a downward spiral that was becoming increasingly difficult to reverse. The front desk supervisor, Carol, had perhaps the most comprehensive list of operational issues. "Our reservation system crashes at least twice a week," she explained. "The phones in the guest rooms are from 2008, and half of them don't work properly. The key card system is so temperamental that we have to manually override locks several times per day. And our Wi-Fi speed is so slow that business travelers constantly complain." I took detailed notes as each person spoke, asking follow-up questions and encouraging them to think beyond immediate problems to longer-term opportunities. These were people who cared about their work and wanted to provide excellent service, but they had been constrained by resource limitations and corporate indifference for so long that many had stopped expecting things to improve. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said when everyone had finished presenting their concerns. "We're going to implement a comprehensive improvement plan over the next 18 months. Technology infrastructure. First, new reservation system, upgraded Wi-Fi, modern phone systems, reliable keycard access. Then facility improvements, guest room renovations, lobby updates, restaurant modernization, fitness center expansion." Roberto raised his hand. "What about the breakfast service? I know there were complaints this weekend, and honestly, we've been trying to provide quality food with equipment that should have been replaced 5 years ago." I smiled, remembering my family's critique of his effort. "Your food quality is actually quite good, Roberto. The problems are operational flow, efficiency, equipment, and space utilization. We're going to redesign the breakfast area, install modern equipment, and give you the tools you need to showcase your culinary skills properly." The energy in the room began to shift as people realized this wasn't going to be another cost-cutting exercise disguised as improvement. Tom started sketching renovation ideas on his notepad. Carol began making lists of technology priorities, and Maria asked specific questions about staffing levels and training programs. "I want each of you to prepare detailed proposals for your department improvements," I continued. "Don't worry about budget constraints. Focus on what would truly make a difference for our guests and your ability to do excellent work. We'll prioritize based on impact and feasibility, but I want to understand the full scope of possibility." As the meeting concluded, Jennifer walked me to the elevator with an expression of barely contained excitement. "In 2 years of working here, I've never seen the team so energized," she said. "They've been waiting so long for someone to take their concerns seriously." "Good managers want to provide excellent service," I replied. "When they're not able to do that because of systemic constraints, it's frustrating for everyone involved. Removing those constraints should pay dividends in both employee satisfaction and guest experience." The elevator doors opened on the lobby level, and I was struck again by the property's potential. The space had good natural light, elegant proportions, and a layout that could work beautifully with some strategic update. The current furniture was serviceable but uninspired, and the color scheme was that generic beige and burgundy combination that seemed designed to avoid offending anyone while also failing to delight anyone. I spent the morning walking through the hotel with Jennifer, taking photographs and making notes about every space. The pool area was functional but dated, with tile that had seen better days and furniture that looked tired. The fitness center was cramped and poorly ventilated, with equipment that was adequate but not impressive. The business center consisted of 2 computers and a printer in a space that felt more like an afterthought than a minute. We could easily double the size of the fitness center by expanding into the adjacent storage room, I observed, measuring spaces with my phone app, and the business center could be completely reimagined as a co-working lounge that would appeal to both hotel guests and local professionals. Jennifer was taking notes on her tablet, occasionally stopping to take photos of specific areas we discussed. "The co-working concept is interesting. We get a lot of business travelers who need more space than their guest rooms provide, but our current options are limited." "Exactly. And if we design it well, it could generate additional revenue from day-use memberships while providing a valuable amenity for hotel guests." I was already visualizing the space: comfortable seating areas, plenty of power outlets, excellent Wi-Fi, coffee service, maybe even small meeting rooms that could be reserved by the hour. My phone rang as we finished touring the ground floor, and I was surprised to see David's name on the caller ID. In 12 years of being his stepdaughter, he had probably called me directly fewer than a dozen times, and usually only when he needed me to coordinate something for the family. "Emma." His voice was unusually subdued when I answered. "I wanted to apologize personally for what happened yesterday. There's no excuse for leaving you behind like that. These things happen," I said carefully, unsure where this conversation was headed. David wasn't typically given to extended apologies or emotional discussions. "No, they don't," he said firmly. Or they shouldn't. Sarah was devastated when she realized what we'd done. She barely slept last night, and she's been beating herself up about it all morning. I felt a familiar stab of guilt at the thought of my mother distressing herself over the situation. She had such a generous heart, and I knew she would interpret yesterday's oversight as a personal failure rather than the natural result of a family dynamic that had been years in the making. "Please tell Mom not to worry about it," I said. "I'm fine, and I actually got some work done that I might not have otherwise accomplished." "That's gracious of you, but it doesn't make it right." David paused, and I could hear airport sounds in the background. "We're in Vancouver, but I keep thinking about how easily this could have been avoided if we had been more attentive, more considerate of everyone in the group." The conversation felt surreal. In all my years as part of the Peterson family, David had never been particularly reflective about family dynamics or interpersonal relationships. He was a practical man who focused on business and left emotional matters largely to my mother. "David, honestly, it's okay," I said, meaning it more than I had expected to. "Sometimes these things happen for a reason. I'm getting a lot accomplished here." "What kind of work are you doing in Seattle?" he asked, and I detected genuine curiosity in his voice, rather than polite interest. "I realize I don't know as much about your business as I should." Here was the opening I had been unconsciously waiting for, the moment when I could begin to reveal the truth about my professional life, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the years of having my work dismissed, or overlooked, or maybe it was a sense that the revelation needed to happen at the right time, and in the right way. "Hospitality consulting," I said, which was technically true even if it wasn't the complete picture. "I'm working with a hotel chain on operational improvements." "That sounds fascinating," David said, and surprisingly, he seemed to mean it. "I've always thought the hospitality industry was more complex than people realize. There are so many moving parts that have to work together seamlessly." "Exactly," I agreed, warming to the subject despite myself. "Guest satisfaction depends on everything from housekeeping efficiency, to front desk systems to maintenance responsiveness. When one area fails, it affects the entire experience." "I imagine your background in project management translates well to that kind of systemic thinking," David observed. "Coordinating multiple departments toward a common goal." I was struck by his insight. David had actually been paying attention to my professional skills, even if he hadn't previously shown much interest in how I applied them. "It does," I confirmed, "and I think my experience with family event coordination hasn't hurt either. Managing logistics, anticipating problems, ensuring everyone has what they need, those skills are definitely transferable." David chuckled. "You've certainly had plenty of practice with Peterson family logistics over the years. We've probably taken advantage of your organizational abilities more than we should have." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of the family dynamic that I had ever heard from him, and it caught me off guard. "I don't mind helping," I said automatically. Then "Actually, that's not entirely true. I do mind sometimes, but I've never been sure how to say that without seeming ungrateful." "Ungrateful?" David's voice carried genuine surprise. "Emma, you've been nothing but generous with your time and energy. If anything, we should be grateful to you." The conversation was venturing into emotional territory that felt unfamiliar and potentially dangerous. Part of me wanted to continue, to finally express years of frustration and hurt feeling, but another part of me recognized that this kind of discussion would be better had in person, when everyone was present, and we could have a complete conversation rather than a fragmented one. "We should probably talk about this more when everyone's together," I said diplomatically. "These are important topics, but they deserve more time and attention than a phone call allows." "You're right," David agreed, "but I want you to know that Sarah and I have been discussing some things, and we realize we need to do better. As a family, we've fallen into patterns that aren't fair to you." After we ended the call, I stood in the hotel lobby, feeling oddly unsettled. David's unexpected introspection suggested that yesterday's incident had prompted more reflection than I had anticipated. The Peterson family's casual dismissal of me
had been so consistent for so long that I had stopped expecting it to change. The possibility that they might be genuinely reconsidering their behavior was both hopeful and anxiety-provoking. Jennifer approached with a folder of documents. "I've gathered the financial reports you requested," she said. "The last 2 years of revenue data, occupancy rates, guest satisfaction scores, and operational expenses." I spent the next several hours immersed in numbers, analyzing patterns and identifying opportunities. The hotel's performance had been declining steadily, but the decline was entirely attributable to systemic underinvestment, rather than market conditions or location Occupancy rates were below market average, but guest satisfaction scores for people who did stay were actually quite positive, suggesting that the experience was good, but awareness and perceived value were low. "The marketing spend has been almost non-existent," I observed, reviewing the advertising budget. "No social media presence, no targeted advertising, no partnerships with local businesses or tourism organizations. We're essentially invisible to potential customers." Jennifer nodded grimly. "The previous ownership seemed to think the hotel would market itself through location alone, but Seattle has dozens of hotels in this price range, and many of them are much more aggressive about attracting guests." I pulled up competitive analysis data on my laptop, comparing our rates, amenities, and marketing presence to similar properties in the area. The results were sobering, but not surprising. Several nearby hotels were charging comparable rates, while offering superior amenities and maintaining much higher visibility in online booking platforms. "We're going to need a comprehensive marketing overhaul," I decided. "Professional photography, updated website, social media strategy, partnerships with local attractions and businesses, maybe even a complete rebranding depending on what makes sense for the Pacific Crown portfolio." The afternoon brought a series of calls with contractors, technology vendors, and design consultants. I had learned from previous hotel acquisitions that the key to successful renovation was careful planning and phased implementation. Guests needed to feel that improvements were being made without being inconvenienced by constant construction and disruption. "We'll start with the technology infrastructure," I explained to Jennifer as we reviewed timelines. "Guest room Wi-Fi, phone systems, and reservation platform. Those improvements will be largely invisible to guests, but will solve a lot of operational headaches. Then we'll move to guest-facing renovations, probably starting with a few model rooms that we can use to test different design concepts." Jennifer was clearly energized by the detailed planning process. "It's been so long since I've been able to think strategically about improvements, rather than just managing crises. I'd forgotten how much I love the operational side of hospitality management." "Good managers need resources to be effective," I said. "You've been doing excellent work under difficult circumstances. With proper support, I think you'll be able to create something really special here." As evening approached, I found myself thinking about dinner plans, and realized I had no obligations to anyone but myself. For the first time in years, I could eat where I wanted, when I wanted, without coordinating with family schedules or preferences. The freedom was both exhilarating and slightly lonely. I decided to try a small restaurant I had noticed during my morning walk, a farm-to-table place that specialized in Pacific Northwest cuisine. The hostess seated me at a table by the window, and I ordered a glass of Washington State Pinot Noir and the evening's fish special. While waiting for my meal, I checked my email, and found a message from my assistant back in Portland. Amanda had been handling my consulting clients and managing my real estate portfolio, while I focused on the hotel acquisitions, and she was remarkably efficient at keeping everything running smoothly in my absence. "The Denver property closing is confirmed for Friday," her email reported. "The Portland hotel's occupancy rates are up 12% from last month, and we've received 3 new consulting inquiries from hotel chains in California. Also, your mother called the office looking for you. I told her you were traveling for business, and would return her call when available." I smiled at Amanda's diplomatic handling of my mother's call. Sarah still thought of my work as a small consulting practice that I ran from my apartment, and she occasionally called my office number when she couldn't reach my cell phone. The idea that I had a full-time assistant and multiple business operations would have surprised her considerably. My dinner arrived beautifully presented, and I savored both the food and the solitude. This was probably the first meal I had eaten alone in a restaurant in months, possibly years. The Peterson family's social calendar was relentlessly packed with dinners, events, and gatherings that required my attendance, and usually my organizational assistance.
As I ate, I observed the other diners and found myself analyzing the restaurant's operations from a hospitality perspective. The service was attentive without being intrusive, the ambiance was warm and inviting, and the food quality was exceptional. This was exactly the kind of local partnership that could benefit my hotel, recommending exceptional dining experiences to guests while potentially negotiating preferred reservations or special rates. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom wants to know if you're still mad about yesterday. She's been worrying all day." The message irritated me on multiple levels. First, it framed the situation as my emotional reaction rather than their oversight. Second, it made my mother's feelings the primary concern rather than addressing the underlying issue. Third, it positioned Jessica as the intermediary rather than encouraging direct communication. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "I'm not mad. Tell Mom I'll call her tomorrow." Jessica replied immediately, "She'll feel better hearing from you directly." "Can you call tonight? I'm having dinner." I texted back. "Tomorrow is fine. Where?" "Somewhere good." The question caught me off guard. Jessica rarely showed interest in my activities unless they somehow affected her plans. "Small local place. Very good. Seattle has amazing restaurants." "I'm jealous. LA food scene is so pretentious sometimes." It was the kind of casual conversation we rarely had, and I found myself momentarily softened by her apparent genuine interest. "The fish here is incredible. I'll send you the name if you're ever back in Seattle." "Definitely. Talk tomorrow." "Sure," I agreed, then put my phone away to focus on my meal and the evening view of Seattle's lights reflecting on Elliott Bay. After dinner, I walked back to the hotel through downtown Seattle, noting the bustling nightlife and entertainment options that surrounded my property. The location really was excellent. Walking distance to Pike Place Market, the waterfront, shopping, restaurants, and business district. With proper marketing and improvements, the hotel should be able to command significantly higher rates while maintaining strong occupancy. Back in my suite, I spent the evening reviewing architectural plans and design concepts for hotel renovation. I had collected extensive examples from my other properties and consulting projects, and I wanted to develop a cohesive vision for the Pacific Crown brand that could be adapted to each individual location. The design philosophy I favored emphasized comfort, functionality, and subtle luxury spaces that felt sophisticated without being intimidating. Modern without being cold. I wanted guests to feel like they were staying somewhere special, but also somewhere welcoming and accessible. I was deep in reviewing bathroom fixture options when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I felt the familiar mix of affection and apprehension that her calls often triggered. "Sweetheart," her voice was warm but strained when I answered. "I hope I'm not calling too late. I just couldn't go to sleep without hearing your voice." "Hi Mom, it's not too late. How's Vancouver?" "Beautiful as always, but I haven't been able to enjoy it properly. I keep thinking about yesterday and how awful it was that we left you behind." Her voice carried genuine distress, and I felt my irritation dissolving into concern for her emotional state. "Mom, really? It's okay. I got some work done, and I'm fine, but it's not okay," she insisted. "David and I have been talking about it all day, and we realized that what happened yesterday was just the most obvious example of something that's been going wrong for a long time." I sat up straighter, surprised by her directness. My mother rarely addressed family dynamics so explicitly, preferring to smooth over conflicts rather than examine them. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She sighed deeply. "We've taken advantage of your generosity, sweetheart. Your willingness to organize things and take care of details and make sure everyone else is comfortable. And somewhere along the way, we stopped making sure you were comfortable too." The acknowledgement was more direct than anything I had expected, and I felt tears threatening despite my best efforts to remain composed. I chose to help with family events, I said. Nobody forced me, but we should have been more thoughtful about what we were asking of you, my mother continued. And more importantly, we should have been better at including you, at making sure you felt valued for who you are rather than just what you do for everyone else. I struggled to find words that would express my feelings without overwhelming my mother with years of accumulated hurt. Sometimes I do feel more like a family assistant than a family member, I admitted quietly. Oh, sweetheart. My mother's voice broke slightly. That's exactly what David said, and it made me realize how blind we've been. You're my daughter, and you should never feel like anything less than a cherished part of this family. We talked for another 20 minutes, with my mother asking questions about my feelings and experiences that she had never thought to ask before. It was the most honest conversation we had shared in years, and while it didn't erase the hurt of the past, it offered hope for a different kind of relationship in the future. I want to do better, my mother said, as our call was winding down. We all do. David has already said he wants to have a family meeting when we get back, to talk about changing some of our patterns. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. But Mom, change has to be real, not just good intentions. I understand, she replied, and I promise you, it will be real. You deserve so much better than what we've been giving you. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet luxury of my suite, processing the unexpected emotional developments of the day. David's introspective phone call, Jessica's moment of genuine interest, my mother's heartfelt apology. These weren't the reactions I had anticipated from the Peterson family. I had expected them to move on quickly from yesterday's incident, perhaps with a token apology and a return to established patterns. Instead, they seemed to be engaging in actual self-reflection and acknowledging problematic dynamics that had persisted for years. The timing was ironic, considering that I was on the verge of revealing information that would fundamentally change their perception of me. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing changes at the hotel that would demonstrate capabilities they had never imagined I possessed. Within weeks, they would learn that their overlooked family assistant was actually a successful business owner with a portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars. Part of me wondered if their newfound awareness would persist once they learned about my financial success, or if it would be overshadowed by shock and perhaps resentment that I had kept such significant information from them. The Peterson family had always defined themselves in relation to achievement and status, and discovering that I had quietly surpassed them in both areas might complicate their efforts to treat me with greater respect, but those were concerns for another day. Tonight, I was simply a woman, sitting in her own hotel, planning improvements that would create jobs and enhance experiences for thousands of future guests. The family that had forgotten me was beginning to remember that I mattered, and that felt like progress regardless of what complications might arise. I fell asleep reviewing contractor bids and design proposals, dreaming of renovated lobbies and happy guests, and family dinners, where my voice carried the same weight as everyone else's. The forgotten daughter was becoming impossible to ignore, and soon, she would be impossible to dismiss. 3 weeks passed before the Peterson family learned the truth, and when they did, it wasn't because I chose to tell them. The revelation came through David's business network in the most unexpected and dramatic way possible. I was in Portland reviewing the quarterly performance reports for my hotel portfolio when my phone rang with David's number. The tone of his voice when I answered told me immediately that something significant had happened. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His voice carried a strange mixture of confusion and what might have been awe. Are you the Emma Chen who just acquired Pacific Crown Hotels? My stomach dropped. I had been so careful to keep my business dealings separate from my family life, using my maiden name professionally and maintaining strict privacy about my investments. The question shouldn't have been possible for David to ask. How did you find out? I asked, abandoning any pretense of denial. Richard Steinberg called me an hour ago. He's a commercial real estate attorney I've worked with for 15 years, and he was handling some documentation for the Pacific Crown acquisition. When he mentioned Emma Chen from Portland, he asked if I knew you since we have the same last name in his contacts. He was curious about whether we were related. I closed my eyes, calculating how much Richard might have shared and what David now knew or suspected. When I told him you were my stepdaughter, he got very quiet, David continued. Then he said, and I quote, "Your stepdaughter just completed one of the most impressive hotel acquisitions I've seen in 20 years. She's brilliant." Emma, what the hell is going on? The moment I had been unconsciously dreading and anticipating for months had finally arrived. There was no point in evasion now, not when David clearly knew enough to demand explanations. "I own Pacific Crown Hotels," I said simply. "I acquired the chain 6 months ago along with several independent properties. It's been my primary focus for the past year." The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You own a hotel chain. You own an entire hotel chain, and none of us knew." "Yes." "How many properties?" 23 in the Pacific Crown portfolio, plus 4 independent hotels I've acquired separately. Another long pause. "Emma, what's the value of this portfolio?" I hesitated, knowing that this number would change everything. "Current market value is approximately $47 million, but that's conservative. With the improvements I'm implementing, it should be worth significantly more within 2 years." The sound David made might have been a laugh or a gasp. $47 million, my stepdaughter, who we left at a hotel because we weren't paying attention, owns a $47 million hotel empire. "The hotel where you left me is one of the properties I own," I admit. "The Grand Metropolitan in Seattle." "Oh my God," David's voice was faint. "When you said you had a business meeting the next morning, I was meeting with my management team to begin implementing improvement plans." "This is insane," David said, and I could hear him moving around, probably pacing his office. "Emma, how is this possible? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" The questions I had been preparing to answer for months came pouring out, and I found myself explaining the progression from consulting practice to hotel investor to chain owner. David listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds of amazement or disbelief. "So when we were complaining about the breakfast service that weekend," he said slowly, "we were essentially giving you feedback about your own property." "Yes, and actually some of the observations were helpful, even if the delivery was somewhat hard." David laughed, but it was the laugh of someone whose worldview had just been fundamentally reorganized. "This explains so much. Your confidence during that conversation with my parents about business strategy, the way you seemed to know exactly what questions to ask about operational efficiency. I thought you were just naturally perceptive about business, but you were speaking from direct experience." "I've been managing hotel operations for over a year." The consulting work gave me the foundation, but ownership taught me things that no amount of advisory work could have provided." "Emma, this is extraordinary," David said, his voice gaining strength as he processed the information. "Not just the financial success, though that's incredible, but the strategic thinking, the market analysis, the operational expertise you must have developed. This is business achievement at a level that most people spend decades trying to reach." His admiration was genuine, and it touched something in me that had been carefully guarded for years. The Peterson family had never acknowledged my professional capabilities, had never expressed pride in my achievements. Hearing David's unreserved respect for what I had accomplished felt like receiving recognition I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked again, more gently this time. "This is exactly the kind of success we should be celebrating as a family." I considered how to answer that question honestly without inflicting unnecessary hurt. "Because I wasn't sure you would see it the way you're seeing it now," I said finally. "My professional accomplishments have never seemed particularly important to the Peterson family. I thought this might be dismissed as well, or viewed as somehow threatening." David was quiet for a long moment. "That's a damning indictment of how we've treated you," he said eventually, "and probably an accurate one. I also wanted to prove to myself that I could build something entirely on my own merits," I continued, "without family connections or assistance, or even awareness. It was important for me to know that my success was completely independent." "And it is," David said firmly. "What you've accomplished is remarkable, Emma. I'm proud of you,
and I'm also ashamed that you felt you couldn't share this with us. After we ended the call, I sat in my Portland office staring out at the city skyline and trying to process what had just happened. The secret that had defined my life for the past year was no longer secret, at least not from David. Within hours, the rest of the Peterson family would know, and everything would change. My phone buzzed with a text from David. I told Sarah, she's in shock but incredibly proud. Can we call you tonight to talk more? The idea of explaining everything again, of fielding questions and managing reactions, felt exhausting, but I also recognized that this conversation was inevitable and probably necessary for our family's future. Of course, I texted back, I'll be home after 6. The afternoon passed in a blur of hotel business and strategic planning, but my mind kept returning to the evening ahead. How would my mother react to learning that her daughter, who she had always worried about and tried to protect, was actually more financially successful than anyone in the Peterson family? How would Jessica and Michael respond to discovering that the family member they had consistently overlooked was now the wealthiest among them? I left the office early and stopped at my apartment to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a complicated conversation. My one-bedroom space suddenly felt inadequate for the magnitude of the discussion ahead. The modest furnishings and simple decor that had always seemed sufficient now seemed almost deliberately humble in comparison to the Peterson family's lifestyle, but perhaps that was the point. I had never needed external symbols of success to validate my achievement. The hotel properties, the investment portfolio, the business relationships I had built, these were meaningful to me because of what they represented in terms of capability and independence, not because of the lifestyle they could afford. My phone rang at exactly 6:30. It was a conference call with my mother, David, Jessica, and Michael all on the line. The nervous energy was palpable even through the phone connection. "Sweetheart," my mother began, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "David has told us the most amazing news." "I can hardly believe it." "It's true, Mom," I said simply. "I've been building this business for the past few years, and it's grown beyond what I initially imagined possible." $47 million, Jessica said, and I could hear the awe in her voice. "Emma, that's more than Dad's entire net worth." "Money isn't everything," I replied, though I appreciated her recognition of the scale involved. "The real satisfaction comes from building something meaningful, creating jobs, improving experiences for guests and employees." "But still," Michael chimed in, "this is incredible. I had no idea you were involved in anything this significant." "When did you transition from consulting to ownership?" I spent the next hour walking them through the progression, explaining how consulting had led to investment opportunities, how early successes had provided capital for larger acquisitions, and how the Pacific Crown deal had represented the culmination of years of strategic planning. "What I don't understand," Jessica said, "is how you managed all of this, while still helping coordinate family events and maintaining your regular schedule with us. When did you have time to research properties and negotiate deals?" "Evenings, weekends, early mornings," I explained. "And I travel for work more than you might have realized." Many of those business trips were actually property evaluations or investor meetings. "All those times you couldn't join us for dinner because you had work commitments," my mother said slowly. "You were building a hotel empire." "Sometimes, yes, though to be fair, you also sometimes had dinners that I wasn't invited to." The comment created an uncomfortable silence, reminding everyone of the family dynamics that had prompted my secrecy in the first place. David cleared his throat. "Emma, what are your plans going forward? Are you expanding the portfolio further?" "Selectively," I confirmed. "I'm more focused on improving the properties I already own than on rapid expansion, quality over quantity. I want Pacific Crown hotels to become known for exceptional guest experiences and employee satisfaction." "That's smart," Michael said, and I could hear genuine respect in his voice. "Sustainable growth is more valuable than aggressive expansion that compromises operational excellence." The conversation continued for another hour, with family members asking detailed questions about my business strategy, operational challenges, and future plans. For the first time in our family's history, I found myself at the center of an extended discussion about professional achievement, with everyone listening attentively to my responses and treating my expertise as valuable. It was everything I had wanted from the Peterson family for years, and yet it felt strange and somewhat hollow. Their sudden interest in my work, their enthusiastic questions about my business model, their expressions of pride and admiration, all of this had been triggered by the revelation of my financial success. Where had this curiosity and respect been when I was simply a competent consultant, trying to build a practice? "We need to celebrate this properly," Jessica announced as the call was winding down. "This is huge news, and we should do something special to acknowledge it." "That's a lovely idea," my mother agreed enthusiastically. "Emma, would you be comfortable with that? I know you've kept this private for reasons, but within the family, we should definitely recognize this achievement." I found myself hesitant about the prospect of a celebration. The Peterson family's desire to acknowledge my success felt genuine, but it also felt contingent on the scale of that success. Would they have been equally eager to celebrate if I had built a modest consulting practice worth $500,000 instead of a hotel empire worth 50 times that amount? "Let me think about it," I said diplomatically.
This is all still very new. Having everyone know, I need some time to adjust. Of course, David said. But Emma, I want you to know how proud we all are. What you've accomplished is extraordinary, and we're honored to be your family. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment, feeling emotionally drained and conflicted. The Peterson family's reaction had been more positive than I had dared to hope, but it had also confirmed some of my concerns about their values and priorities. They were proud of me now because I was successful in terms they could understand and respect. The question was whether this newfound regard would persist if my circumstances changed, or if it would prove as conditional as their previous dismissal had been. Over the next few days, the family's behavior toward me shifted dramatically. Jessica called twice to ask for business advice about her lifestyle blog, suddenly treating my insights as valuable rather than irrelevant. Michael invited me to lunch to discuss sustainable business practices, acknowledging for the first time that I might have expertise worth learning from. My mother sent flowers to my office with a note expressing pride in my achievements and gratitude for my patience with the family's blindness. David's reaction was perhaps the most significant. He called me the day after our family conference to propose a business lunch where he could introduce me to some of his commercial real estate contacts who might be valuable connections for my hotel operations. "I've been thinking about your expansion strategy," he said over lunch at one of Seattle's upscale restaurants. "There are several properties in the region that might fit your criteria, and I know the owners or brokers involved in most of them." It was surreal to be sitting across from David, discussing business deals as equals rather than as stepfather and dependent child. He had clearly researched hotel investment strategies since our previous conversation, coming prepared with thoughtful questions and relevant market insights. "The Morrison Building downtown has retail space on the ground floor that could work beautifully for a boutique hotel," he suggested, showing me photos on his phone. "The bones of the building are excellent, and the location is perfect for business travelers." I studied the images with genuine interest. David's commercial real estate expertise was considerable, and his suggestions were professionally sound rather than merely enthusiastic. "What's the asking price?" I asked, already mentally calculating renovation costs and potential revenue. $8.5 million, David replied, "which seems high for the current condition, but with your operational improvements, it could probably support that investment level." We spent 2 hours discussing potential acquisitions, operational strategies, and market opportunities. David's insights were valuable, and his connections could indeed open doors that might otherwise require months of relationship building. But underneath the professional conversation, I could sense his ongoing adjustment to this new version of our relationship. For 12 years I had been his wife's daughter, someone he cared about but didn't need to take seriously as a business peer. Now I was a successful entrepreneur whose achievements exceeded his own, and he was clearly recalibrating his perception of who I was and what our interactions should look like. "Emma," he said as lunch was ending, "I owe you an apology for not recognizing your capabilities sooner. I assumed your consulting work was a small-scale operation, something to keep you busy rather than a serious career path. I was wrong, and I probably missed opportunities to be helpful or supportive. You weren't wrong about the consulting work, I said carefully. When I started, it was a small-scale operation. You couldn't have predicted it would evolve into hotel ownership, but I could have shown more interest in what you were building, David insisted. I could have asked better questions, offered connections, treated your professional development as important rather than peripheral to the family's concerns. His acknowledgement more than I had expected. David's respect had always felt particularly elusive, because he was the family's primary breadwinner and business success story. Having him recognize my achievements and express regret for his previous dismissal felt like a significant validation. Moving forward, David continued, I'd like to be helpful if possible. I have relationships throughout the commercial real estate industry that could benefit your expansion plans, and selfishly I'd like to learn from your approach to operational efficiency and customer service. Your strategies might be applicable to my own properties. The offer was generous and professionally valuable, but it also highlighted how dramatically our family dynamic was shifting. David was now treating me as a peer worthy of his respect and attention, someone whose expertise could benefit his own business operations. That evening I met Jessica for drinks in Capitol Hill. She had suggested the meeting, saying she wanted to hear more about my business in a setting where we could really talk. It was the first time in years that Jessica had sought out my company for reasons other than needing help with logistics or coordination. I keep thinking about that weekend in Seattle, she said as we settled into a corner booth at a wine bar. All those times we complained about the hotel service, not knowing we were talking to the owner. You must have been so annoyed with us. Annoyed isn't the right word, I said honestly. More like frustrated that you were critiquing something without understanding the complexities involved in fixing it. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. I do that a lot, don't I? Complain about things without thinking about the effort required to improve. It was a moment of self-awareness from Jessica that I hadn't expected. She had always been quick to criticize but slow to consider alternative perspectives or underlying challenges. We all do that sometimes, I said diplomatically. It's easier to identify problems than to develop solutions. But you actually develop solutions, Jessica pointed out. You saw problems in the hospitality industry and built a business around fixing them. That's completely different from just complaining about bad service. She paused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. I've been thinking about my blog, about whether it's actually accomplishing anything meaningful, or if it's just self-indulgent content creation. After learning about what you've built, I feel like I should be doing something more substantial with my time. What would substantial look like to you? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Jessica considered the question seriously. Something that creates value for other people, I think. Something that requires real skills and expertise rather than just opinions and lifestyle content. I've been coasting on Dad's support and my own privileges without building anything that would stand on its own. It was the most honest assessment of her situation that I had ever heard Jessica articulate. The revelation of my business success seemed to have prompted some serious self-reflection among all the Peterson family members. What interests you? I asked. If you could build any kind of business or career, what would genuinely excite you? I think I'd like to work in hospitality, Jessica said, surprising me. Not hotels necessarily, but maybe event planning or restaurant management, something that involves creating experiences for people, making them feel welcome and valued. The irony of Jessica wanting to enter the hospitality industry wasn't lost on me, but her interest seemed genuine rather than merely imitative. Those are challenging fields, I warned. Long hours, demanding customers, thin profit margins. It's not glamorous work most of the time. I know, Jessica said, but maybe that's what I need. Something that would challenge me to develop real skills and work ethic rather than just relying on natural advantages. We talked for 2 more hours about career possibilities, business strategies, and personal growth. It was the most substantive conversation Jessica and I had ever shared, free from the usual undercurrents of competition or dismissal. As we prepared to leave, Jessica hesitated before speaking again. Emma, I want to apologize for how I've treated you over the years. I've been condescending and dismissive, and I've taken your help for granted while never really respecting what you brought to our family. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it. I was threatened by you, Jessica continued. Not by your money, obviously, since I didn't know about that, but by your competence, your reliability, your ability to handle situations that I found overwhelming. It was easier to dismiss you as boring or overly serious than to admit that you were better at adult responsibilities than I was. Her honesty was both painful and healing. The acknowledgement of her behavior patterns helped explain years of interactions that had left me feeling confused and hurt. I'd like to do better, Jessica. I'd like us to have a real relationship, one where I treat you with the respect you deserve, rather than just taking advantage of your generosity. Over the following weeks, similar conversations played out with other family members. Michael called to discuss sustainable business practices, acknowledging that my environmental initiatives in the hotel industry were more comprehensive and effective than anything his company had implemented. My mother invited me to lunch and spent 2 hours asking detailed questions about my business strategy, expressing amazement at the complexity and sophistication of what I had built. The Peterson family's newfound appreciation for my capabilities was gratifying, but it was also complicated by the knowledge that this respect was contingent on my financial success. I found myself wondering whether they would have been equally interested in changing their behavior if I had simply asked them to treat me better, without the catalyst of discovering my business achievement. The question became more pressing when David suggested that I join the family's annual investment review meeting, something I had never been invited to participate in before. Your expertise in market analysis and operational efficiency would be valuable for evaluating our portfolio, he explained. Given your success in building wealth through strategic investments, your perspective could help us optimize our own financial decisions. The invitation was a clear recognition of my professional credibility, but it also highlighted how transactional the Peterson family's relationships tended to be. They were now interested in my input because they believed it could benefit them financially, just as they had previously dismissed my opinions, because they saw no value in them. I accepted the invitation because I was curious about their financial situation, and because participating in family business discussions was something I had wanted for years, but I also approached it with new awareness of how the Peterson family's respect was earned and maintained. The investment meeting took place at David's office on a Saturday morning. He had prepared a comprehensive review of their portfolio, real estate holdings, stock investments, retirement accounts, and business valuation. The presentation was professional and thorough, clearly the result of careful planning and preparation. Our total net worth is approximately $12.8 million, David explained, displaying summary charts on his conference room screen. Most of that is tied up in illiquid assets, the house, commercial properties, business equity. Our annual income is strong, but our cash flow is tighter than these numbers might suggest. I studied the financial breakdown with professional interest. The Peterson family was indeed wealthy by most standards, but their lifestyle expenses were high relative to their liquid assets. They were living comfortably but without significant financial cushion for major changes or unexpected expenses. What are your goals for portfolio growth? I asked, treating this as I would any client consultation. We'd like to increase liquidity without sacrificing long-term appreciation, my mother replied. We're not getting any younger, and we want to ensure we have flexibility for retirement and potential healthcare needs. We've also been considering expanding the real estate development business, David added, but that would require significant capital investment, and we're not sure whether the returns justify the risk. I spent the next hour analyzing their portfolio and asking questions about their investment timeline, risk tolerance, and strategic objective. It felt strange to be providing financial advice to people who had never previously sought my professional input, but it was also satisfying to apply my expertise in a way that could benefit my family. Based on what you've shown me, I concluded, I think you're actually in a stronger position than you realize, but you could optimize your asset allocation for better cash flow and growth potential. I outlined several recommendations, diversifying their real estate holdings to include some income-producing properties, adjusting their stock portfolio to emphasize dividend-paying stocks, and considering a gradual exit strategy from some of David's more speculative development projects. The key is balancing growth with stability, I explained. You don't need to take aggressive risks to achieve your financial goals, but you could benefit from more strategic positioning of your existing assets. David and my mother exchanged glances that suggested my recommendations aligned with their own instincts about their financial situation. Would you be willing to work with us on implementing some of these strategies? David asked. We could formalize it as a consulting arrangement if you prefer, but your insights could be incredibly valuable for our financial planning. The request felt both flattering and complicated. The Peterson family was finally recognizing my expertise and seeking my professional help, which was something I had wanted for years. But I was also aware that this recognition had come only after they learned about my financial success, and I wondered about their motivations for seeking my assistance. I'd be happy to help, I said carefully, but I think we should be clear about expectations and boundaries. This would be a professional consulting relationship, not just family advice. Absolutely, David agreed quickly. We would want to pay your standard consulting rates and approach this as we would any other professional engagement. The conversation continued for another hour, with family members asking detailed questions about investment strategies, market trends, and financial planning approaches. For the first time in my relationship with the Peterson family, I was positioned as the expert whose opinions carried weight, and whose recommendations would be taken seriously. It was everything I had wanted from them, and yet it felt hollow in ways I hadn't anticipated. Their respect for my expertise was genuine, but it was also clearly tied to their awareness of my financial success. The consulting arrangement they were proposing would benefit me, professionally, and financially, but it would also fundamentally change our family dynamic in ways that might be difficult to reverse. As the meeting concluded, I realized that the Peterson family's discovery of my hotel empire had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had forced me to confront what I actually wanted from these relationships, and whether financial success was a sufficient foundation for the respect and inclusion I had been seeking. The woman who had been forgotten at her own hotel was now being courted as a valuable family asset, and the irony wasn't lost on me, that achieving independence from their approval had finally earned me the very thing I had once desperately wanted. 6 months after the revelation, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of the Grand Metropolitan Seattle, watching as the Peterson family experienced my world for the first time as informed observers, rather than casual guests. They had requested this visit, wanting to see the transformation I had implemented and understand the scope of my operations firsthand. The changes were dramatic. Gone were the tired beige walls and generic artwork, replaced by warm earth tones, local photography, and living walls of Pacific Northwest plants. The furniture was modern but comfortable, arranged in conversation areas that encouraged both business meetings and relaxed socializing. The front desk had been redesigned with clean lines and integrated technology that streamlined the check-in process while maintaining personal service. "This is incredible," Jessica breathed, running her hand along the smooth wood reception counter. "It doesn't even look like the same hotel." Jennifer Morrison approached our group with a confident smile that reflected her own transformation over the past months. As general manager, she had embraced the renovation process and emerged as a strong leader who commanded respect from both staff and guests. "The occupancy rate has increased 38% since the renovations completed," she reported proudly. "Guest satisfaction scores are up 45%, and we're now booking at rates 20% higher than our previous averages." David studied the financial metrics Jennifer presented with obvious admiration. "Those are exceptional results for such a short time frame. What do you attribute the success to?" "Staff training and empowerment," Jennifer replied without hesitation. Ms. Chen invested heavily in developing our team's skills and giving them authority to solve problems immediately, rather than escalating everything through management layers. When employees feel valued and capable, that translates directly to better guest experience. I watched my family absorb this information, seeing their growing understanding of what I had built. The business principles I applied weren't revolutionary, but implementing them consistently across multiple properties, while maintaining quality standards, required organizational capabilities they were beginning to appreciate. Michael had been quietly observing the breakfast service area, which had been completely redesigned according to the flow optimization plan I had sketched months earlier. "The efficiency improvements here are remarkable," he commented. "The old layout created bottlenecks, but this design moves people through naturally without feeling rushed." Would you like to see the guest rooms? I offered. We took the elevator to the renovated floors, where I opened a standard king room for their inspection. The transformation was even more striking here. The generic hotel furniture had been replaced with pieces that felt both sophisticated and welcoming. Local artwork created visual interest without overwhelming the space, and the lighting had been completely redesigned to provide multiple options for different activities and moods. My mother sat on the bed, testing the comfort of the new mattresses and bed. "This feels like a luxury hotel," she said with amazement, "but the rates Jennifer mentioned are still reasonable for business travelers." "That's the positioning strategy," I explained. "We're targeting the gap between budget accommodations and true luxury property. Excellent quality and service at fair prices, focused on value rather than prestige." Jessica examined the bathroom renovation, which featured modern fixtures, premium toiletries, and thoughtful details like hooks placed at convenient heights, and adequate counter space for personal items. "These improvements probably weren't cheap," she observed. "They weren't," I confirmed, "but the return on investment justifies the expense. Higher rates, better occupancy, reduced maintenance costs, and improved employee retention all contribute to profitability." We spent 2 hours touring the property, with family members asking detailed questions about everything from heating system efficiency to staff scheduling software. Their interest seemed genuine rather than merely polite, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to share the complexity and satisfaction of the work I had been doing. The tour concluded in my temporary office, where I had been working during the renovation process. The space overlooked Elliott Bay, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows highlighted the architectural plans and operational reports covering my desk. "This is your office?" my mother asked, settling into one of the chairs facing my desk. "One of them," I replied. "I maintain offices in Portland and San Francisco as well, plus I spend significant time traveling between properties." David studied the organizational charts and project timelines posted on my walls. "How do you manage operations across this many locations?" "The coordination requirements must be enormous. Technology helps tremendously," I explained, showing them the dashboard system that allowed me to monitor key performance indicators across all properties in real time. "But the real key is hiring excellent general managers and giving them authority to make decisions. I set standards and provide resources, but I don't micromanage daily operations." The conversation gradually shifted to broader business philosophy and management strategy. I found myself articulating principles I had developed through experience, but had never formally discussed with anyone in my family. "The hospitality industry taught me that success comes from paying attention to details that most people overlook. Guest satisfaction depends on everything working correctly, from the temperature of the coffee, to the speed of the Wi-Fi to the friendliness of the housekeeping staff. You can't fake quality service. It requires genuine commitment at every level." Jessica had been unusually quiet during the tour, but now she leaned forward with apparent intensity. "Emma, I've been thinking about what we discussed months ago, about wanting to do something meaningful with my career. Would you consider letting me work here? Not as a favor but as a real employee who would have to prove herself." The request surprised me. Jessica had mentioned interest in hospitality work, but I hadn't expected her to want to start within my organization. "What kind of position are you thinking about?" I asked carefully. "Entry level," she said firmly. "Maybe guest services or restaurant operations, something where I could learn the business from the ground up rather than being handed a management role I haven't earned." I studied her expression, looking for signs of impulsiveness or unrealistic expectation. What I saw instead was determination and something that might have been humility. "It would be challenging work," I warned. "Long hours demanding customers, lots of mundane tasks that aren't glamorous at all. And I would expect the same performance standards from you that I expect from any employee." "I understand," Jessica replied. "I know I've been privileged and haven't had to work hard for most things in my life, but I want to change that. I want to build something real." David and my mother exchanged glances that suggested this conversation had been planned or at least discussed among them previously. "We've talked about this as a family," my mother said gently. "Jessica is serious about wanting to develop genuine professional skills and work ethic.
We all think working for you could be valuable for her if you're willing to consider it. The prospect of supervising Jessica presented obvious complications. Our relationship had improved significantly since the revelation of my business success, but working together would test those improvements in ways that social interactions couldn't. Let me think about it, I said diplomatically. If you're serious about this, there might be opportunities, but they would have to be the right fit for both you and the organization. Michael had been studying the financial reports spread across my desk. These profit margins are impressive, he commented, especially considering the renovation costs you've absorbed this year. The renovation expenses are front-loaded, I explained. We accept lower profits during the improvement phase, because the long-term returns justify the investment.
Within 18 months, most properties show significant revenue increases that more than compensate for the initial costs. Have you considered franchising the Pacific Crown brand? David asked. With this operational model and these results, other investors might be interested in licensing your approach. The question revealed how seriously he was taking my business achievements. Franchising was indeed a growth strategy I had been evaluating, but it would require significant infrastructure development and quality control systems. Eventually, yes, I said, but I want to perfect the model across my existing properties before expanding through franchising. Quality control becomes much more challenging when you're not directly managing operations. We continued discussing business strategy for another hour, with family members offering suggestions and asking questions that demonstrated their growing understanding of the hospitality industry's complexities. The conversation felt like a genuine consultation rather than polite family interest, and I found myself appreciating their insights. As the afternoon concluded, David made an unexpected proposal. Emma, I'd like to discuss a potential business collaboration. Nothing that would interfere with your hotel operations, but an opportunity that might benefit both of our companies. I raised an eyebrow, curious about what he had in mind. I'm developing a mixed-use property in downtown Bellevue, he explained. Retail on the ground floor, office space on floors 2 through 5, and I've been considering adding a boutique hotel component on the upper floors. Your expertise in hospitality operations combined with my real estate development experience could create something exceptional. The proposal was intriguing both professionally and personally. Working with David on a development project would represent a completely different kind of family collaboration than anything we had previously attempted. What scale are you thinking about? I asked. 40 to 50 rooms, David replied. Small enough to maintain intimate service standards, large enough to be financially viable. The location is excellent for business travelers, and there's really no comparable boutique option in that market. I considered the logistics and market potential. Bellevue's business district had grown significantly in recent years, and a well-positioned boutique hotel could indeed find strong demand. I'd need to see detailed financial projections and market analysis, I said, but conceptually it's interesting. I was hoping you'd say that, David smiled. I've already commissioned preliminary studies, and I think the numbers will be compelling. The idea of partnering with David professionally felt both exciting and slightly nerve-wracking. Our family relationships had improved dramatically, but business partnerships could strain even strong relationships if not managed carefully. As we prepared to leave the hotel, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. Sweetheart, I wanted to thank you for being so patient with all of us as we've adjusted to understanding who you really are. You don't need to thank me, Mom, I said. I know this has been a lot to process. It has, she admitted. But more than that, I've been thinking about how we treated you before we knew about your success, the way we took your help for granted, the way we didn't really listen to your opinions, or include you in important discussions. That was wrong regardless of your financial situation. Her acknowledgement touched me deeply. Among all the family members, my mother's opinion had always mattered most to me, and hearing her recognize the problems in our past interactions felt genuinely healing. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, she continued, but I'm also ashamed that it took learning about your success for us to start treating you with the respect you deserved all along. The important thing is that we're treating each other better now, I replied. The past is the past. Maybe, my mother said thoughtfully, but I don't want to forget the lessons we've learned. About paying attention to people we care about not making assumptions based on superficial observations, about recognizing value that isn't immediately obvious. Our conversation was interrupted by Jennifer approaching with a question about upcoming conference bookings. But the moment had been meaningful enough to leave me feeling optimistic about our family's continued evolution. That evening, the Peterson family took me to dinner at one of Seattle's premier restaurants. It was the first time they had organized a celebration specifically focused on my achievements, and the gesture felt significant, even though the recognition came months after my success had been established. Over dinner, the conversation naturally turned to future plans and possibilities. Jessica reiterated her interest in working in hospitality, and we began discussing specific positions that might provide good learning opportunities. Michael asked detailed questions about sustainable business practices that he could potentially implement in David's development project. Most surprisingly, my mother expressed interest in becoming more involved in my business operations, not as an employee, but as an advisor or board member who could provide perspective on customer service and guest experience issues. I've spent years in nursing, focused on making people feel cared for during vulnerable times, she explained. I think those skills might translate to hospitality work, helping ensure that guests feel welcome and valued. The idea had merit, and it represented a level of engagement with my professional life that my mother had never previously shown. I'd be interested in exploring that. Patient care and guest services do share important fundamentals about empathy, attention to detail, and problem solving. As dinner concluded, David raised his wineglass in a toast. To Emma, he said formally, for building something extraordinary and for being gracious enough to share it with a family that took too long to appreciate her. The toast felt ceremonial, marking a transition in our relationships that had been months in the making. But it also felt authentic, representing genuine recognition and respect, rather than mere politeness. Driving back to my hotel that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my relationship with the Peterson family had evolved. The woman they had forgotten at a hotel 6 months earlier was now being courted as a business partner, potential employer, and respected family member whose opinions carried weight. The transformation was gratifying, but it had also taught me important lessons about the nature of respect and recognition. The Peterson family's newfound appreciation for my capabilities was genuine, but it had required dramatic external validation before they were willing to reconsider their assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. I had spent years seeking their approval and inclusion, believing that their acceptance would validate my worth and belonging. Instead, I had discovered that building something meaningful independently had provided far greater satisfaction than any external recognition could offer. The irony was that achieving independence from their approval had finally earned me the very thing I had once desperately wanted. But now that I had their respect and inclusion, I realized that while it was pleasant to receive, it wasn't essential to my sense of self-worth or professional satisfaction. The forgotten daughter had become impossible to overlook, but more importantly, she had learned to value herself independently of anyone else's recognition or approval. 1 year later, I stood in the executive conference room of Pacific Crown Hotel's new corporate headquarters in downtown Portland, looking out at the city's skyline as I prepared for the most important board meeting in my company's history. The quarterly results spread across the mahogany table told a story of remarkable growth and transformation that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The numbers were compelling. Revenue had increased 62% year-over-year across the entire portfolio. Guest satisfaction scores averaged 4.6 out of 5 stars across all properties. Employee turnover had dropped to just 8%, compared to the industry average of 35%. Most significantly, the company was now valued at $78 million, representing a 65% increase from my original acquisition cost. My board of directors began filing into the room, and I felt a familiar surge of pride at the diverse group of advisors I had assembled. Jennifer Morrison had been promoted to Regional Operations Director after her exceptional performance in Seattle. Dr. Patricia Williams, a hospitality industry veteran, provided strategic guidance on expansion opportunities. Robert Chen, my financial advisor and distant cousin, ensured our growth remained sustainable and profitable, and sitting at the far end of the table was my mother, Sarah Peterson, whose insights into customer service had proven invaluable over the past 8 months. Her nursing background had translated remarkably well to hospitality operations, and her suggestions for improving guest experience had been implemented across multiple properties with excellent results. "Good morning, everyone," I began as the meeting came to order. "Before we review the quarterly results, I want to share some significant news about our expansion strategy." I activated the presentation screen, displaying architectural renderings of a stunning new property. "We've finalized the acquisition of the historic Portland building downtown. This will become our flagship Pacific Crown location, featuring 85 luxury suites, a rooftop restaurant, and state-of-the-art conference facilities." The board members studied the images with obvious enthusiasm. The Portland building was an iconic structure that had been vacant for 3 years while various developers attempted unsuccessful renovation projects. My ability to acquire and transform it represented a major statement about Pacific Crown's market position and capability. "The renovation budget is $12 million, I continued, with completion scheduled for 18 months. "When finished, this property will establish Pacific Crown as a premium brand capable of competing with established luxury chains." Jennifer raised her hand. "What's our strategy for maintaining consistent service standards as we move into the luxury market segment?" "Excellent question," I replied. "We're developing an enhanced training program that builds on our existing service philosophy while adding luxury-specific protocol. Every employee will complete certification before the Portland location opens." Dr. Williams leaned forward with interest. "Have you considered franchising opportunity? With these results and the brand recognition you're building, there could be significant expansion potential through partnerships." "Actually, yes," I said, clicking to the next slide. "We've received 12 franchise inquiries in the past 6 months, primarily from investors who want to apply our operational model to their own property." The franchising program I outlined would be selective and carefully managed, focusing on maintaining quality standards rather than rapid expansion. Each franchise partner would undergo extensive training and ongoing evaluation to ensure brand consistency. "Our goal is sustainable growth that enhances rather than dilutes the Pacific Crown reputation," I explained. "Better to have 20 exceptional properties than 50 mediocre ones." Robert presented the financial analysis supporting our expansion plan. The company's strong cash flow and established credit relationships provided multiple funding options for continued growth. More importantly, our proven track record of improving underperforming properties had attracted interest from institutional investors seeking hospitality partnerships. "We have the capital and expertise to triple our portfolio size within 5 years," Robert concluded, while maintaining the operational excellence that drives our success. My mother spoke up from her position at the table. "What about employee development and retention as we grow? Our current properties succeed because our staff feels valued and empowered. How do we preserve that culture across a larger organization?" "That's perhaps our most important challenge," I acknowledge. "We're developing a comprehensive leadership development program that identifies and trains managers from within our existing staff. Promoting people who understand our culture is essential to maintaining service standards." The discussion continued for 2 hours, covering everything from technology upgrades to market expansion strategies to competitive positioning. The depth and sophistication of the conversation reflected how far Pacific Crown had evolved from a struggling hotel chain to a respected industry player. As the meeting concluded, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not just with our business results, but with the team I had assembled. These were people who shared my vision for excellence and who contributed expertise that made the entire organization stronger. Jennifer stayed behind as the other board members departed. "I wanted to thank you again for the promotion opportunity," she said. 2 years ago, I was managing a declining property with no resources and limited support. Now I'm overseeing regional operations for one of the most respected hotel companies in the Pacific Northwest. "You earned it through exceptional performance," I replied. The success in Seattle demonstrated leadership capabilities that were exactly what we needed for expansion. "Still," Jennifer continued, "you could have hired an external candidate with more experience." Choosing to promote from within sent a powerful message to the entire organization about opportunity and growth potential. After Jennifer left, I remained in the conference room, reviewing the strategic plans we had discussed and contemplating the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I had been the overlooked Peterson family member, whose professional achievements went unnoticed and unappreciated. Now I was leading a company that employed over 400 people and provided exceptional experiences for thousands of guests annually. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, who had been working as a front desk supervisor at our Seattle property for 8 months. Guest satisfaction scores for November are in. Our team hit 4.8 stars. Thank you for believing in me enough to let me prove myself. Jessica's transformation had been one of the most surprising developments of the past year. The privileged daughter who had never worked in demanding conditions had emerged as a dedicated employee who genuinely cared about service excellence. Her colleagues respected her work ethic, and guests frequently mentioned her helpfulness in their reviews. More importantly, Jessica seemed happier and more confident than I had ever seen her. The sense of accomplishment that came from earning recognition through performance, rather than privilege, had been transformative for her self-image and relationships. David's text arrived an hour later. Bellevue project groundbreaking is scheduled for February. Can't wait to start building our hotel together. The mixed-use development we had designed as partners was proceeding exactly on schedule. David's real estate expertise, combined with my hospitality knowledge, had created a project that was already generating significant pre-opening interest from corporate clients and event planners. Working with David as an equal partner had strengthened our relationship in ways that traditional family interactions never could. We disagreed on design details and operational decisions, but we respected each other's expertise and found compromises that improved the final product. The family dinner is still on for Sunday, his follow-up text asked. Absolutely, I replied, looking forward to it. The Peterson family dinners had evolved dramatically over the past year. Instead of events I coordinated while feeling marginalized, they had become genuine gatherings where everyone contributed and participated equally. My opinions carried the same weight as anyone else's. My professional achievements were celebrated alongside other family milestones, and my presence was actively valued, rather than taken for granted. The transformation hadn't been instantaneous or simple. There had been awkward moments as family members adjusted to treating me as an equal rather than a helpful assistant. There had been difficult conversations about past dynamics and hurt feelings, but gradually we had built new patterns based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's contributions. Michael had become one of my most trusted advisors on sustainability initiatives. His environmental expertise had helped Pacific Crown implement green practices that reduced operational costs while appealing to environmentally conscious travelers. Several of our properties now held EED certifications, and our sustainability programs were featured in industry publications. My mother's involvement as a board member had deepened our relationship in unexpected ways. Working together professionally had given us new topics for conversation and shared experiences that strengthened our bond. She understood my business challenges and celebrated my successes with the pride of someone who had witnessed the work required to achieve them. The evening brought a surprise visitor to my office. Amanda, my assistant, knocked on the door with an apologetic expression. Emma, there's someone here to see you. He says he's a reporter from Hospitality Industry Weekly, and he's hoping to discuss your company's growth story. I was intrigued. Hospitality Industry Weekly was the premier trade publication, and their interest suggested that Pacific Crown was gaining recognition beyond the local market. The reporter Tom Bradley was a veteran journalist who had covered the hospitality industry for over 20 years. He was researching a feature story about successful independent hotel companies and their strategies for competing with major chains. Your growth trajectory is remarkable, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. 3 years from acquisition to regional prominence is virtually unheard of in this industry. What's driving your success? I spent an hour explaining our operational philosophy, employee development programs, and guest experience focus. Tom asked thoughtful questions about our financial strategies, market positioning, and expansion plans. What's particularly interesting, he observed, is your background. Most hotel chain executives come from hospitality families or traditional hotel management programs.
Your path from consulting to ownership is unusual. I think the consulting experience was actually advantageous, I replied. Working with multiple clients gave me exposure to different operational approaches and common problems across the industry. When I became an owner, I had a broader perspective than someone who had worked within a single organization. And your family background, I understand your stepfather is prominent in commercial real estate development. That's true, I confirm. David Peterson has been helpful with market analysis and property evaluation, but I built Pacific Crown independently before we began collaborating. Tom nodded, making notes. The industry is watching your company closely. Your combination of operational excellence and strategic growth has caught attention from some major players. Have you received acquisition offers? We've had inquiries, I said carefully, but Pacific Crown isn't for sale. We're focused on building something sustainable rather than maximizing short-term returns. The interview concluded with Tom requesting permission to tour one of our properties and interview staff members about their experiences working for Pacific Crown. I arranged for him to visit our flagship Seattle location, confident that Jennifer and her team would represent the company well. After Tom left, I sat in my office, reflecting on how surreal the conversation had been. 3 years ago, I couldn't get my own family to take my professional opinions seriously. Now I was being interviewed by national trade publications about business strategies and industry leadership. The transformation felt complete, but also ongoing. Pacific Crown's success had given me financial independence and professional recognition that exceeded my original goals. But more importantly, it had taught me that the approval I had once desperately sought from others was less valuable than the confidence that came from building something meaningful on my own terms. The Peterson family's eventual recognition and respect had been gratifying, but it wasn't the source of my satisfaction. That came from creating an organization that employees were proud to work for, that provided exceptional experiences for guests, and that contributed positively to the communities where our properties operate. The woman who had been forgotten at a hotel 3 years ago was now running a company that would be featured in the industry's most prestigious publication. But the real victory wasn't the external recognition, it was the knowledge that I had trusted my instincts, taken calculated risks, and built something that reflected my values and capability. Sunday's family dinner took place at the new Peterson home, a beautiful but more modest house in Bellevue that reflected their adjusted priorities and financial situation. The conversation flowed easily among topics ranging from Jessica's latest guest service innovations, to Michael's environmental consulting projects, to David's upcoming development milestones. I have an announcement, my mother said as we finished dessert. I've decided to retire from nursing next year and join Pacific Crown full-time as Director of Guest Experience. The announcement surprised everyone, including me. My mother had mentioned enjoying her board involvement, but I hadn't expected her to consider leaving nursing for hospitality work. Are you sure about this, Mom? I asked. Nursing has been your career for 30 years, and it's been meaningful work, she replied, but helping build something new with you feels like the right next chapter. Besides, the skills transfer more than you might think. Both careers are about making people feel cared for during times when they need support. David raised his wine glass to new chapters and unexpected opportunity. As we toasted, I looked around the table at the Peterson family that had evolved so dramatically from the group that had forgotten me 3 years earlier. We were different people now, with deeper understanding of each other's capabilities, and more authentic relationships based on mutual respect, rather than assumed roles. The success of Pacific Crown had been the catalyst for these changes, but the real transformation had been internal. I had stopped seeking external validation, and started building something that reflected my own vision and values. The Peterson family had stopped taking each other for granted and started recognizing individual strengths and contributions. Thank you, I said quietly, addressing the entire table, for believing in me, for supporting Pacific Crown, and for becoming the family I always hoped we could be. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you for showing us what was possible when we finally learned to see clearly. Later that evening, as I drove back to Portland through the quiet highways, I reflected on the journey from forgotten family member to respected business leader. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but it had taught me valuable lessons about resilience, independence, and the importance of building something meaningful rather than simply seeking recognition. Pacific Crown hotels would continue growing and evolving, facing new challenges and opportunities in an ever-changing industry. The Peterson family would continue deepening their relationships and supporting each other's achievements with newfound appreciation and respect. And I would continue building, creating and leading with the confidence that came from knowing my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. The woman who had been edited out of family photos had written herself into a story of success that no one could ignore or diminish. The forgotten daughter had become unforgettable, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet accumulation of excellent work, strategic decisions, and unwavering commitment to her own vision of what was possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.